Folks, just consulting here with the ranking member, and obviously we're thrilled to have the full committee chair, but we're going to now vote on the first vote and then come right back, because after that first vote, we should have some time. So we'll come right back after the first vote. Yes, all vote now and kind of hustle back. Thank you. All right, so. Subcommittee will come to order. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's subcommittee markup of the fiscal year 2024 appropriations bill for the Department of State, Foreign Operations, and related programs. Now, at the outset, I'm going to ask all of you, all my colleagues, for a little bit of your indulgence. My opening statement is a little bit longer than normal because I think it's important to explain the changes in this year's bill. Obviously, I need to start by thanking Chairwoman Granger for her leadership. As you all know, she knows this bill, this subcommittee, as a former chairman better than I ever will, and her leadership has been invaluable. I also want to thank, imagine having the privilege of having the chairman emeritus of the full committee also, but he's also a former chairman of this subcommittee, and that is, of course, the Dean of the House, Mr. Rogers. And I also need to acknowledge Ranking Member Lee. Her and I were just talking about, while her and I there are very few issues that we don't disagree on. But I will tell you, she cares deeply about these topics, about this subcommittee, and her and I have developed, frankly, what I consider to be a good relationship. And I look forward to continuing working with her, with you, Madam Ranking Member, as the process moves on. And again, also I want to thank each member of this subcommittee whose meaningful input during our budget hearings, frankly, has been greatly appreciated. Those engagements, requests from members, and really a thorough scrubbing of organizations and programs funded in this bill were key factors in developing the measure that we have here today. Now, let me be very clear. There were the two most important issues I considered while putting this mark together in every decision: our national debt and our national security. The State and Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill that is here before us today totals $52.5 billion in new budget authority, which is a reduction of $7.2 billion from fiscal year 2023 enacted and $16.4 billion before the President's fiscal year 2024 request. This amount is offset by $11.1 billion rescissions of partisan wasteful spending, resulting in new net spending of only $41.4 billion. Now, if you've read the bill, and I know the members of the subcommittee have, you know it reflects a significant different approach than previous bills. But it is, frankly, very straightforward. And I've said this before. If you are a friend or an ally of the United States, this bill supports you. But if you are an adversary or you are cozying up to our adversaries, frankly, then you're not going to like this bill. Organizations that advance freedom and deliver results favorable to the American national security interests are supported. Organizations that elevate human rights abusers, conspire with autocrats, reject transparency, and tolerate anti-Semitic sentiment do not merit support. I want to mention a few key allies. The bill provides unwavering support for our democratic ally, Israel, and fully funds the United States-Israel Memorandum of Understanding by providing $3.3 billion in security assistance. It also takes bold, new action to definitively address the anti-Israeli bias in the United Nations and anti-Israeli actions at the International Court of Justice. The bill recognizes two other vital security partners in the region by providing full support to Egypt and to Jordan. It also includes a new prohibition of funding for any nuclear agreement with Iran until such an agreement is submitted to Congress and ratified by the Senate. Not a very radical concept. We all recognize that the national security threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. This bill provides $4.4 billion to counter the malign influence of the People's Republic of China, which is $1 billion above the President's request. Now, within this funding, a top priority is supporting Taiwan's security needs. For the first time, I repeat, for the first time, this bill provides a direct appropriation of $500 million in foreign military assistance grants to help democratic Taiwan deter PRC's coercion and aggression. The United States must get serious about the malign, destabilizing action of Communist China around the entire world, including in our own hemisphere. That's why this bill strengthens effort to counter this encroaching threat, while also including new safeguards to prevent taxpayer dollars from supporting the Chinese Communist Party. It encourages investments for nearshoring so that critical supply chains are brought closer to the United States and Americans are not dependent on the PRC for essential needs. Another priority in this bill, and for all Americans, I believe, is to combat the trafficking of opiates, and I'm glad that the Dean of the House is here, because this is an issue that he has been leading on, and thank you, sir. In particular, fentanyl, by the way. Everyone in this committee knows of the effects of fentanyl in our districts, our neighborhoods, and our schools. This, frankly, deadly, insidious drug is finding new paths to kill our young people, and it must be stopped. So funding directed in this bill will strengthen efforts in countries that counter fentanyl production and trafficking. The immigration crisis. The migration crisis at the southern border is, frankly, symptomatic of this administration's lack of a clear strategy towards the Western Hemisphere. For too long, countries cozying up to our adversaries have been rewarded, and this bill puts a stop to that practice. The United States must focus more attention and provide resources to meet the challenges and opportunities in our own backyard, including to support like-minded countries like Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, and Panama. Now let me turn to Colombia. And as some of you may know, I'm the co-chairman of the Colombia Caucus in the House. The importance of the United States partnership with Colombia cannot be understated. For decades, the U.S. has partnered with and supported the people of Colombia in building a thriving and stable democracy. And I, as I mentioned, have been one of the strongest supporters of those efforts for many, many years. Unfortunately, the current trajectory of Colombia under President Petro's leadership is increasingly at odds with the United States' security and economic interests. Therefore, I have decided to defer funding for Colombia. Now, because of the strong and historic relationships between Colombia and the United States, as well as, by the way, the Colombian armed forces and police in the United States, the committee will continue to assess the actions of the Petro government as the appropriations process moves forward. I deeply and sincerely hope that more favorable actions in the future will allow us to move forward to further strengthening our long-standing partnership with Colombia, and I look forward to continuing working with all of you on that. More broadly, this committee recognizes the growing threat of authoritarian regimes around the world. Therefore, the bill fully funds democracy assistance accounts in support of freedom and human rights where they are threatened. As a 2-year anniversary of the historic uprising by the people of Cuba to demand freedom, the bill restores critical funding for the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. This program, some of you might be surprised, this program has been cut drastically in recent years, while funding for broadcasting in the rest of the world received annual increases. This bill rebalances those investments. The bill also includes $30 million for democracy programs in Cuba. I am proud that both of these programs were requested on a bipartisan basis, and I believe it sends a very strong message as we approach the anniversary of those pro-democracy protests. Now, before discussing funding for the United Nations, let's consider who's running the show. Russia was chair of the UN Security Council during the month of April. Iran, this sounds like a fake movie. Iran will be the next vice president of the UN General Assembly. China, where a genocide against the Uyghurs is raging, and now we know that their involvement in Cuba, and they have, well, we've all read their involvement in Cuba, one of the world's oldest brutal dictatorships. They sit on the UN Human Rights Council. And North Korea, because that wasn't enough, folks. North Korea is now the newest member of the World Health Organization. Taiwan is not allowed in, but now North Korea is the newest member. It would be hard to even make this up, frankly. It sounds fake, right? But remarkably, it's true. Sadly, it's true. And this is taking place while Israel is routinely attacked and undermined across the entire UN system, while the world's worst human rights abusers remain, frankly, relatively untouched. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that no funds are included in this bill for the UN regular budget. The ineffectiveness and the egregious failures of the United Nations and UN bodies do not merit support based on the goals and priorities of this bill and based on the goals and priorities of the United States, of the people of the United States. Over the last several years, we have witnessed a boondoggle of climate change spending, and our bill provides a much-needed course correction in several key areas. It prohibits funds for the Green Climate Fund and other climate financing and requires a GAO study on climate funding, which I predict will demonstrate that billions of taxpayer dollars had, frankly, no measurable impact on climate change. The bill also puts a stop on counterproductive climate policies that, frankly, place a straitjacket on energy and on economic growth in developing countries. These policies leave countries unable to support themselves, more dependent on foreign aid, and frankly throws the door wide open to communist China. So amidst this wasteful spending, I would also point out that the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change takes an awful lot of taxpayer-funded trips in jets on high-profile events, be it coronations, royal weddings, and other sorties to, frankly, elite capitals around the world. To address this and other frivolous expansion of bureaucracy, the bill eliminates funding for special envoys and special representatives that are not authorized. I repeat, that are not authorized or Senate confirmed. The bill puts new emphasis on advancing U.S. economic interests by promoting American businesses abroad, increasing efforts to resolve commercial disputes, and prioritizing consular services to reduce the passport backlog. This problem is no longer an American inconvenience, but frankly, it's impacting millions and millions of Americans seeking to travel internationally. Finally, and most importantly, this bill includes all longstanding pro-life protections, which includes a prohibition on all funds from being used to pay for abortions and builds on those requirements by applying the Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance Policy to all global health funding. The bill also prohibits funding for the UN Population Fund. It promotes American values by restoring funding for religious freedom programs abroad and supports faith-based organizations that are helping to deliver United States foreign assistance. Now, before turning to the ranking member, the Honorable Ms. Lee, I want to express my deep appreciation for the work of this staff. I have been driving them crazy. So from the majority staff, I want to thank, again, the clerk, Susan Adams, the entire team, Craig Higgins, Clelia Alvarado, Jamie McCormick, Megan Gallagher, Trey Hicks, Alex Sutton, John Muscolini, and obviously also, again, I can't forget him, Joe Cutler. From my personal office, I also need to thank Cesar Gonzalez, my chief of staff, Giselle Reynolds, and Autumn Morley. And from the minority staff, because you know that I'm driving them crazy as well, right? So, and you too, right? Aaron Kolodziejski, and Aaron, I always have a hard time with that. And my name is Diaz-Balart, I should not have a hard time with you. Lori Millon and Lillian Waverly. We are so grateful for all of your hard work. And again, I now want to recognize the distinguished ranking member who I've said. We have serious differences. We know that, but we've been able to work with cordiality, and for that, I am very grateful. The distinguished ranking member is now recognized.
Well, good morning, everyone. And first, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to Chairwoman Granger and our ranking member, DeLauro. Thank you all for your diligence, hard work, and commitment to global peace and security. And yes, to the chairman, I consider the chairman a friend. He is very straightforward with me, and if you know me, I'm pretty straightforward with him. And what we work on together, I think, is extremely important. And we do have differences of opinion. I'm listening to your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I agree with one thing you said. But I share that because we have to learn, especially with this bill, and as we work to try to maintain our leadership in terms of global peace and security, which is the lens I look at this bill from, we have to try to work together and make sure we can find places to work collaboratively for the common good of the planet. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. The work of the State Foreign Operations Committee, it's near and dear to me, as you know. I believe strongly in the importance of lifting people up, addressing inequities and injustice, and tackling problems that our country faces by working in partnership with others. That's why the House mark that we're considering today is extremely disturbing to me. I believe, again, that we all do believe in global peace and security, and this bill runs counter to those goals. First, as discussed last week, the allocation being presented to us today for the programs of the State Department, USAID, and other related programs is wholly inadequate. The majority clearly understands this because they have had to make up for the absurdly low allocation by including, and I say this is a very cynical rescission of a tax credit to our own constituents from the Inflation Reduction Act. Even with these rescissions, this bill is 12% lower than our current funding and 24% lower than what the administration thinks that we need to meet our global commitments. Global investment and engagement are more important now than ever. This bill fails to meet the challenges of our time. And let me remind you, and like I always try to remind this committee, that we have three legs of the stool of our national security: development, diplomacy, defense. Defense is, what, over $850 billion? And ours is not even $60 billion. So at some point, we've got to rebalance our commitment to development and diplomacy. There's a lot in the bill about mis- and disinformation, but here are some facts. People are fleeing their home countries in record numbers. There are 108 million people forcibly displaced, the largest number in history. Yes, some of them are coming to our border, but millions are fleeing into countries even less equipped to deal with these flows. 1 in every 4 countries have populations facing severe hunger, exacerbating conflict and instability. In West Africa, for example, a third of the children are stunted and not able to typically develop physically and intellectually. Lack of response will affect us for generations. 600 million people are already living in areas that are unfit for human life due to climate change. They are already experiencing life-threatening heat waves, water shortages, and coastal flooding. Some of the allies are threatened with literally being swallowed by the ocean. We can pretend that it doesn't exist, but we are all going to have to live with the consequences. This bill ignores those realities. It views the world in a black and white, good and evil paradigm. If we don't like everything about an organization or can't control their actions, this bill prohibits funding. It's either our way or the highway. Believe me, that's not the approach that the government of the PRC is taking. The PRC is not applying litmus tests. They're offering help. Most people I speak to around the world would prefer, mind you, to partner with the United States. But with this bill, the majority is pushing people into the arms of the PRC. As the former chair of this subcommittee, I understand the difficulties of writing an SFOPS bill, but I'm deeply disturbed by the path this takes us down. Politics is supposed to stop at the water's edge, right? This is a deeply political bill that seeks to satisfy some very extreme members of Congress among us, without consideration of the real-life consequences for our national security and the well-being of our allies. What would it truly mean to defund the United Nations? This mark would do that. The bill says it takes a hard line on countries that don't share our values, but it removes conditions on human rights, political prisoners, and corruption on countries we know struggle with these challenges. It asks our diplomats and development professionals to do more monitoring, reporting, and oversight, but it shortchanges them of the funding that they need for operations and staffing. The bill invites the culture wars into our foreign policy by making diversity, drag queens, and the critical race theory boogeyman and boogeywoman distracting us from the real life or death challenges this world faces. The bill also takes a dishonest approach to the threat posed by climate change. People are confronting the impacts of human-caused climate change right now. Life-threatening temperatures, crop failures, floods, and severe weather. They need to help. They need help in confronting the problems that, in many ways, we created. Yet the majority wants to pretend that our climate finance investments are about controlling the planet's temperature like some global thermostat. That's not how it works. We have countries that might literally not exist in a generation because of the changes that are already happening. Failing to invest in adapting to the new reality means conflict and crisis, and it puts Americans and people everywhere at risk. One area that the bill does prioritize is global health, but then undercuts these investments by curtailing partnerships that would make every investment go further and be more sustainable. The World Health Organization is not perfect. No organization is. But coming out of a global pandemic that killed 7 million people globally, we're not going to participate in the one global table focused on coordination around health interests? Doesn't make any sense. Around the world, 218 million women still don't have access to the tools we need to decide when and how to have a baby, and hundreds of thousands die in childbirth. But we're going to make it harder for women to access care, both through policies and reduced funding. We're going to cut off UNFPA, the one partner that provides services to mothers and their babies in the hardest places. And I'm more upset about how this bill attacks efforts to strengthen diversity in our foreign policy workforce. I was very proud to be the first African American to chair the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, the subcommittee. Mr. Chairman, I think you probably are the first Hispanic member to serve as chair. This is historic and it's important as we talk about engagement and priorities with the rest of the world. People around the world, religious and ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus people, they look to the United States for support and inspiration as they seek to claim their human rights. The rich diversity of the United States is one of our greatest strengths. It's unimaginable to me that my Republican colleagues see a threat in considering how to make sure that our diplomats and development experts reflect that same diversity. That should be respected in our foreign policy and in our funding priorities. I know many of my Republican colleagues support the investments in the SFOPS bill because I have seen thousands of requests that members submit in prior years. And yet this bill is being held hostage by a small group of members that reject compromise or negotiation, and you know what I'm talking about. And it rejects the value of federal investments to address America's challenge. Today, the House mark would have severe consequences for the United States leadership, our ability to work with other countries on shared challenges and our long-term national security. The world is full of threats that don't respect borders, from climate change to pandemics to assertive dictators. We can't stick our heads in the sand and hope it will all go away. It's deeply disappointing to me that I will not be able to support this bill in its current form. Democrats will not support a bill if it would mean turning our backs to the most vulnerable women on the looming threat of climate change. We all know that in the end, final appropriations bills will need bicameral and bipartisan support, and I really hope, Mr. Chairman, that we have an opportunity to improve this bill going forward. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much to the distinguished ranking member. It's a privilege to now recognize our full committee chairwoman, Ms. Granger, who, by the way, is also, as I mentioned before, a former chair of this subcommittee. It's an honor to recognize you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you, Chairman Diaz-Balart, for presenting this fiscal year 2024 state and foreign operations. And thank you for allowing me to come in and talk and listen to this very important committee. It's very, very important. As the former chair of this, I know the importance of this and experienced it. And what you're doing is so very important, more important perhaps now than ever. But as I've said before, we must take a hard look at everything we oversee. I thank the chairman and the members of this subcommittee for doing just that. The bill strikes the right balance in supporting the highest priorities while reducing spending where we can. Instead of funding unnecessary programs such as climate change initiatives, the bill before us refocuses spending on programs that strengthen our national security. For example, the bill prioritizes resources to counter China, Russia, Iran, and other hostile countries. Finally, the bill includes many provisions that are important to members on my side of the aisle. The bill strengthens pro-life protections, supports faith-based organizations and promotes religious freedom, and prevents funding for controversial programs. At a time when our enemies are becoming more aggressive, we must continue to support our partners and allies around the world. I thank the chairman for including full funding for our great ally Israel to defend itself, and for including many conditions that address bias against Israel. To close, I want to thank the subcommittee members and staff, both majority and minority, for their hard work on this bill, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm also privileged to recognize our full committee ranking member, Ms. DeLauro, for her remarks. You're recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and both to you and to Ranking Member Lee. I thank you and thank Chairwoman Granger for work that you've done on the subcommittee. I'd also like to say a thank you to the majority and minority staff. And on the minority side, Aaron Kolodziejski, Laurie Mignon, and Linda Wasvari. Where should I start? This bill fails to protect Americans. It weakens our national security, and it yields America's position as the leader of the global community to our adversaries. The greatest challenges facing the United States are multidimensional and cross borders. The House Republicans' 2024 State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Bill shortchanges foreign assistance. It abdicates our country's leadership on a global stage. It hinders our ability to address the climate crisis, abandons global security, harms women around the world. I think you have misplaced where you want a wall. You are in the process of building a wall around the entire nation. This is a reversal of the United States' historic position on a world stage. We are supposed to be the leaders of the free world. World War II established the United States as the foremost superpower, the global model of democracy and freedom and generosity. But whether we are talking about military, economic, or humanitarian assistance and influence, or any of the areas our foreign policy takes us, this bill completely unravels the hard-fought credibility we have earned to be global leaders. It subverts global peace and security. The majority is diminishing the United States, what we stand for, and what our values are, for our own people and for people around the world who look to us for inspiration and hope. Not to mention, the majority is imperiling the relevance of the Appropriations Committee, not just domestically, as we have in the last several days, but internationally as well. Republicans have walked away from the budget agreement agreed to by the House Speaker and the President of the United States. The majority's allocation proposed an unfathomable 31% cut to our nation's ability to engage in diplomacy and to project soft power. But they knew from the start such a cut would be irresponsible and leading to negative repercussions around the world. Like so many of the other bills have come forward with, this bill claws back billions of dollars, a $13 billion rescission to be exact, $11 billion of which will come from Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, part of the Inflation Reduction Act. This fund leverages private sector investments to help communities all over the country modernize and transition their energy infrastructure. The program is set to directly create 1 million jobs over a decade, 380,000 in low-income and disadvantaged communities, and would produce $100 billion in cost savings over the expected lifetime of the investments. This is the same act we have seen over and over again, first in H.R. 1 and again in the Default on America Act. This is a historic program that will benefit Americans living in each of our districts, and it has no business being on the bargaining table. With this level of funding, the majority looks to send us back to the isolationism of the early 20th century. We live in a time of escalating threats and competition abroad that require commanding influence and enduring cooperation with the international community. This is the wrong time to retreat in our efforts to engage peacefully and constructively. Other countries and our adversaries, they are engaging aggressively. Global engagement and foreign assistance are critical to bolstering our national security. In the markup of the defense bill, our colleague, Defense Subcommittee Ranking Member McCollum, invoked former President Trump's defense secretary. Allow me to echo the same statement. Former Secretary Mattis said, and I quote, "If the State Department funding gets cut, I need to buy more ammunition." And I can only guess how much more he would say we will need after the majority's proposed cuts. This bill abdicates U.S. leadership at the United Nations and other multilateral and international institutions by not including any funding for the UN regular budget, the Pan American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, or most of our assessed contributions. Republicans eliminate the international organizations or programs account, endangering support for UN Women, UNICEF, and the UN Development Program. When it comes to international cooperation, withdrawing from these organizations is putting America last and allowing others to take our place. This bill prohibits the U.S. from contributing to the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, the world's largest provider of donated contraceptives to developing countries. In addition to providing family planning services, UNFPA seeks to end preventable maternal death and gender-based violence and harmful practices, stopping preventable death, and ending female genital mutilation. Republicans don't believe we have an interest or a role in either. And by shortchanging humanitarian programs at a time when a historic number of refugees are fleeing conflict and instability, the United States will not have the tools to properly respond and assist our allies. Finally, the partisan riders are another reminder of where the majority is looking to take this process. More bans on DEI, gender-affirming care, drag shows for good measure. This is a pure insertion of policy into our foreign policy, and we must reject it. For all of these reasons, I must vote against this bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the distinguished rank member. So, folks, they just called votes. So, any other members who would like to be recognized? Okay. Or, because we can also just break and then come back after votes, if that's what you'd like. Is any other member want to be recognized other than one? All right, so then why don't we recognize you now, and let's see if we can, let's see how much time we have. You're recognized.
Right. Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, and all of your staffs for all of your work on this bill. Mr. Chair, I want to acknowledge your deep history and enduring commitment to issues in Latin America. It shines through this bill. I firmly believe that despite the heated rhetoric and blatant pandering from some of our colleagues outside of this room on all issues relating to Latin America, the best path forward and the only successful path forward for U.S. foreign policy in Latin America is when we come together Democrats, Republicans, around enduring U.S. values. Commitment to democracy and the rule of law, not contributing to corruption, and standing up for a free press are just some of the values that I know all of us share. Given these shared values, first and foremost, Mr. Chairman, I ask that you join me in taking sincere bipartisan steps to stand by our values in the Northern Triangle. I think that we each have some differences of opinion in some respects when it comes to specific policy decisions in the region, but the United States must remain united around its shared values, and I hope to work with you to demonstrate that unity abroad. I hope to be able to have a conversation before we go to full committee on this bill. I have to say that there are many parts of the bill that concern me, but today I'm not going to go into anything other than Latin America. Instead, I want to say that it gives me great pause that the bill lifts restrictions on foreign military financing and international military education and training have been lifted this year. These restrictions are lifted without adequate commitments and good faith actions from those governments to reform their own system of governments who have already demonstrated abuses and have used our U.S. military equipment against their own people and threaten U.S. and UN diplomats with our own equipment. And without the reforms to our own systems that recent audits by the Government Accountability Office have revealed that are necessary. Today, we are on the eve of a Guatemalan national election this weekend, a process that has been shamefully undermined.
If the gentlewoman will, could I ask you, because it's important that we listen to your statement, can we pause, vote, and then come
Sure.
back?
Come
And I
back.
apologize, but we're out of
It's
time.
fine.
All right, let's go vote and come back. Ms. Torres, again, my apologies, but the vote, we had to get to the vote, and so I want to, again, recognize you and thank you.
What are you going to give us if we stay?
What's that?
What will you give us if we stay?
It's what doesn't get taken away. It's
Hopefully 3 minutes to finish my statement.
Anyways, all right, let's call the meeting back to order.
Yeah, Mr.
Ms. Torres, again, thank you, and please, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman and members, to sum up, my concern here is that this bill lifts the restrictions on foreign military financing and international military education and training this year for the Northern Triangle countries, specifically for Guatemala that has been known to abuse and misuse our military equipment, specifically J-8 Jeeps that were used to encircle our U.S. Embassy and UN Commissioner's facility. You know, as I was stating, there is an election taking place this weekend, and the government has removed opposition candidates from the ballot, suppressed voters, jailed journalists, and illegally used public funds on political campaigns. These actions, Mr. Chairman, only serve to increase the number of asylum seekers at our southern border. We cannot give blank checks to this government, and we must ensure that any use of taxpayers' funding is helping our national security and goes to the people that we intend to help to prevent migration to our southern border. I must insist on a transparent process and accountability for all taxpayers' money. Mr. Chair, before our full committee markup, I hope that you and I could have a conversation and that you would reconsider what more we can do together in this region, and I yield back.
And thank you again for your statement. Also, thank you for your work in this area. Any other members would like to be recognized at this moment? Seeing none, if no other members, and now note that there are no amendments on the desk, and I will now recognize the Chairman Emeritus and the Dean of the House, Mr. Rogers, for a motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and the report without objection so ordered. With that, let me thank each and every one of the members and the staff for your hard work and your cooperation. Please travel safely. The subcommittee is now adjourned.